am going to cover just a quick history of the Queen Mary, so that way you already have the historical background for all the stories I'm going to be telling you. It'll be a lot less in-depth than the one you would get on your history tour, though. So, Queen Mary, originally owned and operated by the Cunard Line. Construction would start in 1930 at the John Brown Shipyards, Clydebank, Scotland. Halted by 31 due to the Great Depression. Cunard ran out of money. Eventually, the British government would offer them a loan to continue building. The catch, however, was that they had to merge with White Star, their leading rival, famous for building the Titanic. Once those two companies merged, work could be resumed, and the Queen Mary would set sail on her maiden voyage May 27, 1936, and would continue passenger service from Southampton, England to New York City until 1939 when war was declared on Germany. 1940, the Queen Mary would be drafted into war service, and she would serve as a troop carrier, a hospital ship, and a bride and baby shuttle, taking war brides who were young British women that married American soldiers and their babies across the Atlantic to New York to be reunited with family. Wartime service completed, the Queen Mary was restored to her former elegance. She sailed for another 20 years, known as the stateliest ship on the seas. And then by the 60s, all passenger liners were losing money to jet plane travel. The Queen Mary was no exception, and she was retired and auctioned off. Normally, she would have gone to a scrapyard to be used for her parts, but the highest of the bids came from the city of Long Beach at $3.45 million. So that's how she would end up here, December 9th, 1967. We would then convert her to what you see today, floating hotel, tourist attraction, convention center, and we would open our doors in 1971. In 1993, we would get placed on something called the National Register of Historic Places with historic significance, which means if any of the original material you see on our ship breaks or wears out, we actually have to find that same type of material in order to make repairs. The Queen Mary has been part of Long Beach's history longer than she was at sea. She sailed for 31 years, and December 9th will mark the 52nd anniversary of the Queen Mary's arrival here in Long Beach. And for over 50 years, we have been getting the stories, reports, complaints from crew and passenger alike about all the weird things that happen on our ship. Lights that turn on and off, doors that mysteriously open, people that seem to vanish into thin air. And eventually, National Geographic and Time magazine would place us at number 6, the 6th most haunted place in the US. Not as impressive as number 1, I will give you that, but not all of us can be the Amityville house. And trust me, if we were number 1, I would not be working here. Now, we do get the question quite a bit, why is the Queen Mary haunted? And if we're being honest, we don't 100% know for sure. It's kind of the definition of paranormal, unexplainable. But we do have a few theories that make sense given the history of the Queen Mary. The first is that because the Queen Mary is close to 85 years old, many of her passengers have since passed away, and their spirits could be returning here to the ship. Another theory is that because there were 57 confirmed deaths on board, perhaps some of those souls remain here. And lastly, psychic investigators tell us that there is a vortex on our ship, kind of a gateway between this world and the next that allows spirits to wander through for a visit. Yes?
I think I know where it is because in your restaurant, when we were here, I learned this from my favorite YouTuber's videos that I just met, and it was awesome. Sorry, anyways, so in you guys' restaurant thing, there's 2 mirrors straight up across from each other, and usually in a haunted place, when there's mirrors across from each other, they call that a vortex. And yeah, so I'm guessing maybe it could be there.
Well, you'll have to take the tour and find out. Where is that?
In the restaurant?
Oh, the one upstairs?
I think, yeah.
Now our first story of the day does take place here in the Mauritania. Originally, this was a 3rd-class lounge. So people would come in here to get drinks, play cards, kind of hang out, listen to music. And all of our old lounges have been converted to event spaces, which is why we have the tables and chairs kind of hanging out in here right now. Now, in the early 2000s, there was an event that was going to be taking place, and a housekeeping team came in to start setting up. As they entered, they noticed that there was a woman in an old-fashioned looking red dress sitting in between these 2 mirrored columns. Now, she wasn't really bothering anybody. She seemed to just be mostly hanging out, so the housekeeping team decided to leave her be. They figured as they were setting up the space, she would take the hint and leave on her own. So they started setting up around the edges, working their way in towards the center, and they realized that she had not budged. She was still sitting there. So the head housekeeper approached her and very politely said, "Ma'am, I'm sorry, but we're setting up for an event, so we're not supposed to have anyone in here." And she got no response. It was like she hadn't even opened her mouth. So she repeated herself, "Ma'am, I'm sorry, there's an event, please leave." And again, she got no response. Annoyed now at being ignored, the housekeeper said, "Ma'am, if you don't leave, I will have to call security to escort you out." Once again, she got no response, so she walked over to the phone on the wall and called security. And apparently, as she was hanging up the phone, the lady in red stood up, looked around the room like she was a little bit confused, and then both she and the chair she'd been sitting in disappeared. When security arrived here in the Mauritania, they could not find any evidence of this woman or the chair she had been sitting in. They did, however, find 3 very freaked out housekeepers who all reported seeing the exact same thing. This apparition lasted about 10 minutes, making it the longest apparition we have on this ship. Now, as far as who this lady in red is, we actually don't know. That's part of the reason that she goes by the lady in red. During peacetime, the Queen Mary would carry about 3,000 people per crossing. During the war, we would carry upwards of 15,000 at a time. So with that many people traveling on board for 30 years, you can kind of start to see how it would be really difficult for us to find a specific person to go with the apparition that we're seeing. So a lot of the time, they end up with a nickname, and it's usually after the clothes they're wearing. In this case, it is the lady in red because she was wearing a red dress. We do think it's probably a case in which someone returned to the ship later. Third class was known to be kind of the most fun class we had on board. It wasn't quite as stuffy and proper as first class. So we think at some point there was a woman here enjoying her travels on board the ship, and she had such a good time that when she left at the end of her voyage, it kind of held on to a little piece of her. So later in life, when she passed away, her spirit returned here to the ship, hoping to continue taking all of those wonderful voyages she had taken in life. And now the ship is kind of showing that to us. So you can almost think of all these wacky stories I'm telling you throughout our time together as the Queen Mary sharing her memories with you. Now you folks are more than welcome to get some photos in here before we take off. Once you are ready to go, we'll exit from these doors over here and we'll continue on part of this stuff.
See if there's a ghost that shows up here.
I would put my flash on. I know. Wait. It's a lot better.
Sunset. It's right in right across from the deck.
So you click that, and then you click, no, you click on.
In 2015, one of my coworkers was on a lower deck, and she had just been handed a big stack of paperwork. And she was going to come up here to M deck to drop it off at our offices. So as she was on that lower deck waiting for the elevator, she was kind of flipping through the stack, distracted. The elevator doors opened. She stepped in, pressed the key for the deck she was going to. The doors closed, and she finally properly looked up from her paperwork. And she noticed the reflection of somebody standing behind her. Now she felt really silly because whenever we end up on an elevator with a guest, we like to make you feel welcome. So most of us will say hello. Quite a few of us will ask you if we can help you find where you're going. So she turned around to apologize and explain that she had been distracted, but there was nobody behind her. And when she turned back around, the reflection in the door was gone. Now, I never met Sabria, and that was because that afternoon in 2015, she marched down to HR, filled out her paperwork, and quit. This is not the first or the last time that somebody has quit because of the spirits on board our ship. In fact, I believe we had a member of housekeeping who quit in the last year because she caught footage of a closet door that kept trying to open itself. All right, folks, right this way. So, this piano is original to the ship, and there seems to be a spirit who is kind of attached to it. So wherever it goes on board, that's where we get the most sightings of something we call the Lady in White. Now, since the piano has been here on A deck, people have spotted her standing next to it. Occasionally, she'll be swaying, almost like she's dancing. People have reported her wandering the corridors, and employees working the hotel front desk late at night have apparently seen her walk halfway across the lobby before disappearing. Now, as you've probably guessed by the fact I'm calling her the Lady in White, she is another one of these spirits where we don't have a specific person to go with the apparition, but we do have a guess as to the general type of person she was, and it is based on the dress she's wearing. A lot of the time people will describe it as looking like an old-fashioned wedding dress, and that leads us to believe that she could have been a war bride, one of those British women that married an American soldier and came to the US. The thing is, when these ladies arrived at New York, if they wanted to disembark the Queen Mary, their husband had to be there to pick them up. But it was wartime, so men were getting injured, going missing, getting killed, and there were many, many cases in which they just never showed up at port. Sorry. Thank you. And if that was the case, these women were sent back to England because their husband had to be there to confirm their story. And we think that's what happened to the Lady in White. She was a war bride here on the ship. She made it to New York, but her husband never came to get her. So she didn't really die here on the ship. She died later in life. But the heartbreak of that loss and all of those unanswered questions meant that she couldn't move on. So when she did pass away, her spirit returned to the last place where she had any hope of seeing him again, and that was the Queen Mary. So she's kind of hoping maybe to take that last voyage again with a different outcome, find the man that she had lost, and as a result is continuing to wander the decks of our ship to this day. All right, folks, we'll continue up A deck. Look down A deck, you'll notice that you can't see the other end of the hallway because of that very distinct curve to the deck. That's actually original to the ship. It was a design feature called shear to deck. It means that all the interior decks of the Queen Mary have a curve to them to match the curve of the outside. So it gave her extra flexibility as she was crossing the Atlantic. It allowed her to bend and flex without warping any of the flooring. Now, they don't really design ships like this today, and that's because it's a huge pain. It means that all of the doors and windows are slightly different sizes and shapes. All of our interior is custom built to the angle of the deck. Now, the real reason we stop anywhere on a ghost tour is to hear a story. On our way here, we passed room A023, and in the 90s, there was a pilot staying in the room. Now, he had an early morning flight the next day, so he was trying to settle into bed early. And as he was doing so, he heard a loud crash come from his bathroom. Now, he decided not to investigate because he needed his rest, so he rolled over to try to settle in again. And as he rolled over, he noticed something kind of weird. Despite having checked into his room alone, there was another man sitting at the desk in his room, going over paperwork. Now, apparently the man at the desk looked up, the two of them caught eyes, and then the man at the desk disappeared. The pilot did what I think any of the rest of us would do, and simply rolled over, pulled the covers over his head, and pretended like it had never happened. The next morning, he went in to investigate, and he discovered that all of his toiletries had been emptied out of the bag into the sink, and the bag itself had been discarded into the bathtub. All right, folks, right this way. This elevator, we will be descending about 6 fathoms below sea level. Fathom is a nautical measurement totaling about 6 feet, meaning when these doors open, we will be about 36 feet below sea level. It's actually more like 25 because we're walking on these concrete walkways that were not here originally. Plus, we sit a little bit higher in the room.
Point up there.
I
Whoa.
want to see. Oh my gosh.
Whoa, Kendall, shine your light down there. Here, shine your light down there. I want to get.
Oh, there's nothing.
Wait, no, shine it. Oh, that's cool. Whoa, this is insane.
Dad, how many spirits are here? This is where I found.
All right, I don't want to drop my phone, but
No, my.
We are in the bottom of this ship. Wow. This is cool. Yeah, are you real?
So welcome to our boiler rooms. We just made our way through the water softening plant, boiler room 1, and now we're in boiler room 2. If you worked in the boiler rooms, you did have to be a pretty tough individual. First of all, you had to be okay with heights. If you look kind of right above me here, as well as off to the side and on the wall right back here, you can see some of the original catwalks people would have been walking on. So as you can see, they go all the way up to the ceiling. For reference, where the red paint is, that is about the water line. So you had to be okay with heights, and you had to be okay with heat, because the average temperature in here was around 115 degrees Fahrenheit. And you would have been working at 115 degrees in long sleeves and long pants. Because if you bumped into a pipe unprotected, you would have burnt yourself pretty badly. You also had to wear special wooden soled shoes, because if you wore rubber soled like we are today, the rubber actually would have started to melt as you were working. Then you had to worry about the noise level. It was so loud down here that the rumor was you could scream as loud as you could into somebody's ear and they would still have no idea what you were trying to tell them. So then, on top of it all, you had to worry about the steam itself, because it was so hot and pressurized that if there was a leak, it was pretty much invisible. And it would have been really easy to stumble into that unprotected. To prevent that from happening, men would have been armed with essentially a broom handle, a long stick that they would have tapped against the pipe as they were walking, checking for weak spots. That way, if there was a leak, it would burst onto the pipe and onto the stick, but not onto them. That steam was pressurized and hot enough that it could actually slice that stick in half. So you definitely did not want to find that with your bare hand. Now, at some point, there was a gentleman down here by the name of Henry, and he was gonna go clock out at the end of his shift. And he took a second to kind of stop, take in a breath, take in a hard day's work, and a pipe burst on him and knocked him from the platform, and he fell to his death here at the bottom of the boiler rooms. Now, we'll bring tour groups down here, and people will swear that they can hear tapping kind of like this. They'll also hear whistling. Both of these are ways in which men down here would have communicated with each other. It was too loud just to shout to get each other's attention, but by creating a vibration while tapping or a sharp sound by whistling, good way to get each other's attention. People have also reported footsteps on the catwalks that I pointed out. Thing is, those catwalks are not accessible anymore. So there should be no reason people hear footsteps, but they do. I would say Henry is the closest thing we have to any sort of malevolent spirit. People have come out of our boiler rooms with scratches. A few times across the stomach, a couple times up the rib cage. About 2 years ago, we had a young woman who got scratched down the back of her neck, and she actually left the tour early, which frankly, I don't blame her. But in all fairness to Henry, we don't know that he is evil or dirt or anything like that. It could be that he's just incredibly frustrated. Boiler rooms would have never been a place guests were allowed to go, so it could be that he's trying to scare us out of here for our own safety. Although his plan does seem to have backfired a little bit, because the more people he scares, the more likely we are to bring people down here. All right, folks, we'll go ahead and head back out the way we came in.
Oh, that's my dad.
No, that's not me this time. That's just the ghost.
I'm still shaking.
Queen Mary's classes were not divided by deck like you would see in the film Titanic. They were actually divided into sections by the smoothness of the ride. So the center section of the ship, where it was the most stable, where it was the smoothest ride, first class. Second class, stern or back of the ship. And that was because they had a pretty stable ride, but the engines were below them, so they had to deal with all the vibration. Third class was here in the bow or the front. And that's because every time the Queen Mary hit a wave, she did have to rise and fall with the swell. On good days, 50-foot swells were common. In rough weather, it could be anywhere from 70 to even on occasion, 90-foot swells. And usually by that point, third-class passengers were told to go to bed and try again tomorrow. In fact, stewards would provide tuck-in service. They would go around, tuck people into bed nice and tight, and basically seatbelt them in with their covers so that they didn't tumble out of bed in the middle of the night due to the rough weather. Now, knowing how dramatically the front of this ship rises and falls, and then looking down the third class staircase, you folks might notice some problems. The first is that they're quite steep. The second, they face the front of the ship, meaning when the Queen Mary hit a wave, these stairs could go from about 45 degrees to almost 90. And there were times when people got tossed from the staircase. Now, it really didn't happen all that often because we always gave people fair warning that it would not be safe to navigate the stairs. And when it did happen, people were usually able to stand up, dust themselves off, and go about their day just a bit embarrassed. But twice, we do have record of people being thrown hard enough that they died from the injuries they sustained on the deck below. And in 2012, one of my coworkers was approaching the top of the stairs when he saw a gentleman in all black walk up the last few steps and vanish. And we think this man in black could be the man who lost his life to the third class staircase. Now, knowing how dangerous these stairs are, knowing that the man in black could be haunting them, and knowing that us tour guides have affectionately nicknamed him the Deadly Staircase, I am going to make you walk down it, so watch your step.
I was going to stand on it anyways.
As you're coming down, you'll notice these brass bumps on the banisters. Those were there to try to prevent the third class kids from sliding down.
That'll do it.
The kids, however, proved to be smarter than the adults gave them credit for. They went to their room, grabbed a pillow, and used it as a slide. But the real reason we are here on B deck is because as we continue down the hall, we're going to be passing what is considered the most haunted hotel room on board our ship, room B340. So chances are, if you watch any of the Ghost Hunter shows that take place here, they have gone into B340. And that's because the room was shut down for a really long time due to all of the complaints coming out of there. Things like lights turning on and off, dresser drawers opening and closing. People would wake up in the middle of the night playing tug-of-war with an invisible force over the bed sheets. They would find the water in their sink running when nobody had turned it on. And so many of these complaints resulted in either a refund or a switch to a different room that it just made sense to take the room out of service and save ourselves the headache. But then, all the Ghost Hunter shows started going in there because it was always open, there was never anybody staying in there, made it great for filming, they could kind of hunker down and do their thing. And suddenly, we started getting call after call about staying in the haunted room. So we finally gave in, we remodeled B340, and we reopened it as a hotel room April of 2018 on Friday the 13th. So you can now stay in B340, but if you do, you actually have to sign a waiver that states if anything weird happens, it's not our fault, you knew what you were getting into when you asked for the most haunted room on the ship. Yes.
Isn't there like a Ouija board in there too?
Yes, there's basically a do-it-yourself seance kit in there. So there's a Ouija board, I think there's divining rods, spirit box. That's part of the reason why the room is more expensive than the rest of our rooms, because we really went hard on the haunted theme. So there's
What about adult diapers? Is there adult diapers?
No, but that might be a good idea to add. But if you are a fan of YouTube, you will probably come across a very specific and very awful, gruesome story about what happened in B340, namely that some guy murdered his whole family and then killed himself. I would like to set the record straight here and now. That did not happen. There was never a murder here on board the ship. We do have a connection to something like it that occurred in a family home in Virginia, but our only connection is that the grandmother was sailing on board when it happened. We can't even confirm that she was staying in B340. But we're trying to give these YouTubers the benefit of the doubt, and that in the retelling they got confused and put it here on the ship itself. But there was never a murder on board the Queen Mary. The only death to actually occur in B340 was that an elderly gentleman passed away in the bed. Now, whether he is the one haunting B340, we're not sure, because we feel like dying peacefully in your sleep doesn't really make you want to haunt a place. So we have nicknamed that spirit. For some reason we went with the name Walter. I don't know why, but it's stuck. And we are still getting complaints about Walter, not just in B340, but throughout the hotel on our ship. People will wake up in the middle of the night feeling like someone is sitting on the end of their bed, and when they open their eyes thinking it's going to be their loved one, having just returned from getting water or snacks or something like that, their loved one is still sound asleep in the bed right next to them and nobody else is there. Sometimes when this happens, people will report a voice that says, "I'm so cold." So if you're staying in our hotel tonight, good luck. B340 will be the first room that we pass. It's immediately to your right, and it is the only one without any nameplates. Now people think it's kind of creepy, like we're trying to hide B340, but it's actually because when the room got popular, people kept stealing the nameplates as a souvenir. And after the last time they got stolen, we just gave up. All right, folks, I'll point it out as we walk past right this way.
We don't believe the people know died in there.
Can we go in there? There are people staying in there tonight.
Daddy, how much you want to bet? Sam and Colby. How much you
Oh,
want to
I
bet?
bet you they are.
It's pretty rare that we're going to stay out.
I bet you it is.
How much? Yeah. That's crazy that I hugged.
All right. So as you've been walking around today, a few of you may have spotted the ghost sighting plaques that we have up on the walls. We actually passed one coming down B deck. That describes an event that occurred in 2004. There was a family staying on board the ship. They kind of knew that the Queen Mary had that reputation for being haunted. And as they were coming down the hall, they started to feel like maybe something was with them or trying to follow them. And rather than freak out, they just decided to stop and feel out the situation, see if there was any need to start worrying. And as they were standing there, the grandmother felt compelled to turn around. She just knew that there was something behind her that she needed to see. So she turned around, turned white as a ghost, no pun intended, had to hold herself up against a railing because she swore that she saw somebody walk through a wall. Now, we did try to tell her that when you're looking down B deck, there's a little bit of an optical illusion. You can't see those little side hallways that take people into their hotel rooms. So we tried to tell her that she probably saw somebody enter one of those really quickly. And she said, no, because it wasn't through the side, it was through the center where there are no hotel rooms. So we put up the ghost sighting plaque and then we mostly forgot about it. And then a couple years ago, my coworker was doing his haunted encounter and one of his guests happened to have a service dog with them. Sorry, thank you. And this was a legitimate service dog. It had been lovely, well-behaved, on duty all day, hadn't asked for affection or begged for treats or anything like that. But all of a sudden, as they were coming down B deck, this wonderful, well-behaved dog stopped dead in its tracks, hackles raised, and it started growling at the wall that the grandmother swore she saw somebody walk through.
Wow.
All right, folks, our last stop is one deck below us, right this way. Okay, so this is the entryway to the first class swimming pool. Right now, we're not able to go inside. It's been closed for about 4 years for restoration purposes. If you remember, I said at the top of the tour that we have to replace all original material with that same type of material. And a lot of the tile in there is made out of mother of pearl, which is going to be very expensive and very, very difficult to replace. And in the meantime, we didn't want any more tile to get damaged. I think our plan is to open it back up after it's fully restored, but kind of block off that balcony area so you can step out onto the balcony and look out across the top of the pool, but we probably won't be letting people down next to it anymore. Now the reason the pool is so popular is because it's home to probably some of the most activity on board. People have reported a woman in an old-fashioned bathing suit diving off the edge and vanishing. They have reported wet footprints appearing on the deck. However, there is no water in there anymore. It's just a lighting projector to make it look creepy. And it's the home of one of our more well-known spirits, Jackie. She's a little girl, somewhere between 6 and 8 years old, blonde hair, blue eyes, and she seems to be a pretty playful spirit. A lot of the time, people will see her skipping or dancing along the edge of the pool. Sometimes she'll peek over railing like she's trying to get you to play hide and seek with her. People have heard her singing and playing, and parents of young children specifically will sometimes feel like a little hand is holding theirs. And when they look down, thinking it's going to be their child has actually wandered up to the door and is doing their own thing. Nobody is actually holding their hand. Now, as far as how Jackie ended up in here, we're still trying to figure that out. Originally, we just assumed that a little girl drowned in there, and that's why she owns the place. It's certainly the most straightforward, easy answer. But then we got access to a lot of the old Cunard records and discovered nobody had ever drowned on our ship. Child or adult, first class or second class pool. And that meant we did have to investigate Jackie a little bit more deeply. Eventually, we came to the conclusion that if she did drown here, it would have had to happen when Cunard could not access their own records. The only time that would have happened was when the Queen Mary was being used as a military vessel, which means Jackie would have had to be here during the bride and baby crossings. It was a military operation because it was military wives and the dependents, ton of kids running around on board. No water in this pool, but there was water in the second class pool because it had been converted to a laundry to keep up with the amount of cloth diapers being used on board. In fact, these voyages are sometimes referred to as Operation Diaper. So we think Jackie was a little girl here during Operation Diaper, made her way down to the second class pool, probably as it was being refilled after being cleaned, because it was filled with seawater, and that was done remotely from the bridge. So nobody would have really been down there to monitor it. And she unfortunately fell in and drowned. But that area of the ship has since been removed. Today, it is our 4D theater. So we think when that area of the ship got removed, Jackie simply upgraded to first class. Although we do still see her from time to time down at the stern of the ship. Now at the top of the tour, I also mentioned a vortex on board, kind of that gateway between worlds. Psychic investigators tell us that anywhere from 300 to 500 completely unrelated spirits could have been led on board by that vortex. We don't think that many stuck around permanently. A lot of them probably came by for just a quick visit and then went back home. But it might contribute to the number of spirits we have on board that we see either only once or we can't find any official record for. And that vortex is right in here below the below the changing rooms of the first class pool. So if wartime records become unsealed and we discover at no point did anybody drown here, we will have to investigate Jackie again. And maybe, just maybe, it'll turn out that Jackie has something to do with the vortex. Now folks, believe it or not, I am actually not here to convince you that the ship is haunted. I know it seems that way because I have the keys to get into places and I know all the stories, but my only job as your guide is to take you around, tell you the stories, and give you enough history that they make sense. It's up to all of you to decide whether or not this ship is haunted. So as you're walking around today, keep your eyes and your ears peeled for anything unusual. This does bring us to the end of our tour. I hope you had a good time as I led you around today. If you did, my name is Kate. If the tour stank and you want to complain, there hasn't been a Kate here for over 40 years. If you have any questions or need directions, I will be here for a few minutes. Otherwise, you folks are free to go. I hope you have a great rest of your evening and happy haunting. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You're awesome.